Hey everyone, I just wanted to create this quick introduction for this video so that it has a more clean and polished opening, and then when the full mini course opens up, there will be a more cohesive and branded opening and closing to each of the videos. But without further delay, here's a look at how I shoot wedding ceremonies as a solo shooter.
I know you shoot solo a lot. One of the biggest things that I've run into is like having a groom shot and then like not being able to watch that camera while I'm getting the bride coming down. Where do you typically like set up that groom cam? And I mean, it's probably different in every venue,
walk
but
with me. Here, Michael, you keep filming me, but you go stand where the groom might stand. Michael's gonna be our designated groom. Ladies, he's single. Oh, yeah. When I'm shooting solo and I've got kind of a wide angle across the way, opposite of this camera, and it's zoomed out so I can kind of get more like a wide frame as my safety angle. And this one will be zoomed up on the person standing at the front. I'm usually at the back so I can kind of see where's the bride coming up from, how long, like how are they walking fast, slowly, is the planner like adjusting the dress, like do I have time to stand here and film some of this or do I need to get around to the front? I have so many shots of my wide shot at the back, seeing me walk up, looking at this, and then I could cut to this angle and you see the back of my head, and then I drop out of frame to get into the aisle. So that's typically how I can best combat as a solo shooter to see if anyone's gonna be in my shot. Because 9 times out of 10, once everybody stood up and I'm making my way to the front, as I pass by, I'll see if someone's in the shot. And so much of the time I'll be like, hey, do you mind moving up like two steps? I'll check back, like perfect. It might sound very stressful and you're like, I'm not gonna solo shoot now. But that's like, it's not foolproof. I check the camera, no one's in the shot. And like 2 seconds later, this grandpa just backs up and he's got his phone and he's taking pictures, then he's like, and then he walks back up as she comes into the frame with her parents. And sometimes that's just what it is. It's a live event, you can't control everything. Sure, you might cry for like a full day when you want to use this beautiful moment, just 3 seconds of it, and you can't for your highlight, but for the full ceremony, I'm like, it is what it is.
Just a follow-up on kind of what you were just describing of having, you know, like that one set up there on the groom and then you dropping down. So you know, typically when like bride comes down, whoever she's walking with, father, mother, grandparent, there's typically the exchange, you know, of like they sit down and they hug, and sometimes that parent figure will also hug the groom. Is that camera, when it's focused kind of in the direction of the groom, does that typically get that in focus, like the bride hugging the dad, or do you back up down the middle of the aisle or down the side with the photographer and use the gimbal camera to get the, you know what I'm talking about, like that hug moment?
Very interesting, because so much of the time in the exchange, they'll hit the front of the aisle, they come down, sometimes it's just the dad, sometimes it's just the mom, sometimes it's both, sometimes it's an aunt or an uncle. They'll hit the front and the officiant's like, who gives this woman to make, like they just dive into it, they shake hands, they hug. Other times they get to the end of the aisle, no one speaks and they just turn and hug. And the groom comes up and they'll shake hands and they'll hug. And that's something I have to adjust to on the fly, because once they hit the aisle, I'm not immediately swinging up. I'm kind of holding in here. I'm like, okay, they're not moving. Oh, the officiant's talking, and I'll swing back in and I'll move up the middle of the aisle and either drop down and leave the camera, flip the legs out, or I'll just hold until like they hug or something like that. And usually about that time, they'll say guests can be seated. But again, sometimes they're so quick, I'll just stand here and I'm like zoomed all the way out on my 24-70, and I'm like up high. It's not like the most flattering cinematic angle, but half the time this close-up is like such a good angle where like I get like a really good, nice frame of like the groom hugging the dad and it's in focus. And then introducing, this is where I like to have the same camera, same 7200 on this side, is I'm usually zoomed all the way out on the 7200, and oftentimes, like if I were to place where that camera's placed, instead of placing it about the same equivalent, I'll move it back even further and still be zoomed out on the 70. And it's this like really good safety angle. And there's been a number of times with the ceremony edit or for just piecing together like groom's reaction, her walking down the aisle, and then cutting to people hugging and exchanging and all that. Oftentimes I'll cut to this angle because this either they're out of focus or they're too close on this camera, or the groom will step up and he's no longer in frame. But this angle over here is able to capture that moment a lot more flattering and good of a perspective than me being like pointing down getting it. because this length over here with like the compression on the 7200, it's like a really good, you see the bridesmaids behind, they'll be crying, wiping their eyes. You see like parents at the front here, you see them hugging, you see everybody. So again, that's like just one of the systems I've had to put in place, because half the time this works and gets stuff great, and I don't even use that until later in the ceremony, but sometimes that gets moments that this misses or this gets blocked.
You're saying that you're calling this your safety. For how long does that change? Do you then go and adjust that for the bride? Does that become your bride cam?
Shameless plug for the only educational video I've ever done. It was at the venue here, and you actually see it in the video, is once the bride and her parents have hit the end of the aisle, you see me drop this camera at the very back, and then you see me work my way all the way over here and basically wait for people to be seated. As soon as people are seated, I pick up my tripod and you see me move it back, and I start looking at like, do I like it here? Do I like it here? I'm moving around. And once I find my focal length of what I like for my background, I set it up, I lock in with my focus, and then I roll back around, pick up this camera, make it the same distance, so that like there's like cohesiveness between the two angles. When it switches back and forth, they're at like the same plane, same framing. When we're looking at safety angles, whether you have 2 cameras or you have 5, I think you should always have 1 camera dedicated to like a safety. So for me, with overkill and having the luxury of all these cameras, 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna have a 24-70 on my back left, and it's gonna be zoomed all the way out to about a 24, maybe a 30, 35. And I'll have it tilted up, like upwards. So I'm kind of seeing people's heads as my lower third, the couple around the lower third, maybe the middle, and then a lot of like headroom. We can see their space, we can see mountains in the background. And then on the opposite side, I'll have a 7200, probably zoomed into about an 80, 90, maybe 100. So not too close where if I could miss focus or I miss my framing up. But again, both of those are good, especially for when I'm following people walking down the aisle on my gimbal, I'm following them, and then I whip back over. I had a couple of people early on be like, can you cut out the weird whippy thing you do? And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, every time someone would hit the end of the aisle, your camera swooshes to the back to the end of the aisle. I'm like, oh crap. So I started using these to be able to cut to. So sometimes people walk down the aisle fast, and I just kind of stand there and I don't move. But a lot of times it's like they walk down, the next person's like 15 seconds behind. In that like 5 to 10 second transition, I'll cut to a close-up or a wide from the back. And it's cool because sometimes I'll cut to the shot, this close-up that's on the groom, and you see him like fist bumping a guy. And then while I'm waiting for this next person to walk down, I'll cut to the wide shot. And you can see him like just moving around. He like says something to his guys. I cut back to a close-up on him. You hear him talking, and it's just very like interactive, engaging. And then by the time this person is coming down and I've got them in my frame, I start moving with them again, and I'm able to use that shot, and just vice versa. And I can just cut back and forth between my cameras, knowing certain moments I'm not going to use. These 2 in the back are my safety before people have stood up, and they're my safety for after people have been seated. So when I have to adjust this camera for a close-up, and I have to adjust that camera and move it back, and I need to readjust my gimbal and move it up more, or maybe pick it up. Once people are seated, this close-up and this wide shot and this close-up will be getting all the stuff that I won't be using while I'm moving these cameras around. So again, it's thinking ahead. It's like, I know for a good 45 seconds to a minute, maybe a couple minutes, like if people continue to stand up, these 2 cameras in the back are useless. So I need another constant safety angle, and that's usually the gimbal sitting on the ground in the middle of the aisle, either at the back or in the middle or towards the front. And again, sometimes I just have to let that moment run for 30 seconds, 2, 3, 5 minutes, because sometimes Efficient doesn't tell people to sit down. Cameras in the back still aren't good. This is still not great. You might have to adjust this one to continue getting stuff happening as long as guests are still standing up. It's just kind of like an interactive experience. Like if the guests sit, you know where stuff's gonna be good that you can cut to. If guests continue to stand, oh no, 4 of my cameras are blocked, you can still have a camera in the middle getting stuff like on your gimbal. And so back to what I was saying when I dropped my gimbal, that's me having the luxury of shooting with 5 cameras. If you're shooting on 2 cameras or you're shooting on like 7, I think you should always have at least 1 camera that's like your safety and that you can always cut to. And there might even be times that might not work. Like someone might even block that, or if you have my gimbal do what it's done to me, I set it down and like over time, it just goes and eventually stops, and I finally look at the footage and I'm like, someone's butt is in focus, and I can't use that for I don't know how long until I review the footage.
So where are you, like point A to point B, from the time the bride is walking out the door to the time that she's at the front? Where are you during that time?
That's gonna change from wedding to wedding. I think 2 weeks ago I was editing a video and I had 6 different angles during like the ceremony, and it was like a wide of the bride coming up, close up of the groom, drone shot going up over the vineyard. And people were like, where are you? Like, where are you? How are you flying a drone and on a gimbal? And I'm like, if you could just see like 20 seconds of behind the scenes, you'd see how it works. Like, this stuff just happens quickly. There's so much space and time that I had the time to be like, okay, I can go back behind everyone who's standing waiting for her, drop this, get this like super epic wide and frame up the gate that she's walking through. Okay, that's been good. Should go back, check on my camera, groom's still in frame, pick up my controller. I have my drone already sitting like way out there in the field, far away, like where people can't hear it. I get my shot, leave the drone, put it down, pick up the gimbal, and then I'm running back all the way around, checking this camera, no one's blocking it, swinging in, dropping, waiting for her to come down. That's a luxury option or example because I timed it from her walking through the gate all the way across the grass. I got like 5 drone shots of her walking up because it took her like 1 minute and 48 seconds to get there. With something like this, prior to the ceremony, I was like, okay, I've shot here before. I got my 2 safeties in the back, a wide and a close-up. I got my shot on the groom. I have my gimbal, but I want a creative shot. So I took one of my 5th cameras. I removed one of the cameras from the back, framed my shot how I wanted it, and then I left the camera for like an hour. And then right before she came out, turned my camera back on, hit record, moved around to the front. And that's another thing we can get into if we want to touch on that real quick, is like drone shots during ceremony. I was all, like up until about a year ago, I'm like, oh, that's so intrusive, that's stupid. But then I had a couple different opportunities where we were right by water. I couldn't hear anything because of the wind and water. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna put my drone up right there. No one will hear it. And I got a really cool shot, like the bride walking up with her dad. She was, again, her dad was on crutches. And so they were going really slow. I'm like, oh, this is great. I have all the time to just like get these shots. Even here, even if she comes out the door, like you have so much space. You've got 30, 40 seconds. I mean, unless she's walking quick, you've got 30, 45 seconds to get all the way to the front, and you just make your loop, check your camera, no one's blocking it, swing around, drop. And again, I know like we said earlier, some venues, you don't have the luxury of having like the side aisles. So honestly, that makes things less stressful for me. It's not gonna be as gratifying to film or to edit because I have less to work with. But like, I just get to, okay, get on the aisle, down the aisle. Okay, people are standing. Close up on the groom's good. Drop. Like it's even more simplified when I'm more restricted. So it's more fun to film and edit when you have more space, but it's more like demanding and requires more like on your body and just like being on top of it.
I have more of a like Panasonic question for you.
My heart.
When you like set down your gimbal, do you set the focus? Because obviously if you set it down at the front and like the bride's walking and you're doing something else, like obviously she's moving, so the focus is not gonna track. Or do you just switch to autofocus and kind of hope for the best?
Like once she's down at the front, like down and like
for example, like you said, you set your tripod down on the ground, you flew the drone, you checked the camera. Like they're obviously moving while the gimbal's down on the ground. So did you like set focus?
Yeah, so they were so far away. I was basically set to infinity focus, but it affords me the ability to get like really epic wide shots, frame stuff how I really like it, and not have to be worried or concerned focus is going to be an issue until they're like really, really close. And even then, shooting all the way open, even at a 24, if someone's not close to you, like everything from like the trees and the driveway all the way to the mountains will basically be in focus. So it's not going to achieve like this super dreamy look, but it's going to capture, like you're going more for like the grandeur of the view than you are like, I need to see this exact thing in focus. Even if you're just shooting with one camera, let's say you just had one camera, have a system in place and know whether I'm here or in like a really small space, I'm gonna shoot basically the same way. Realistically, I think most of us are gonna be shooting on a minimal of 2 cameras. Again, have systems in place. Even if you get to where like, oh, I'm shooting with 5 cameras like I am, have systems in place so that like if you need to downscale, and shoot with less cameras, you still know what to do. Or if you get in a space where you're like, oh, I want to try things, like you know what cameras you need to leave where to get the coverage you need, and then you can use maybe 1 or 2 other cameras for like a creative shot. Have your systems in place. Just know your system and your setup inside and out, whether it's going to be inside or outside. Because then once you have that stuff down, that's when you can start to say, if I add another camera, what will I do with it? Or here's what I want to try with it. I made the mistake of doing early on was not knowing what I was going to do every single wedding with 3 cameras. And so when I got a 4th, I'm like, oh, I'm going to try this. And then I like botched 2 of my other angles trying to get this new angle that I'd never gotten before. And so it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't try things until I know the other stuff that's set up will like work every single time. But it's definitely something you have to learn. I didn't just one day say, I'm gonna use 5 cameras and it worked. Like I had to make sure 3 worked again and again and again, and then added a 4th and made sure it worked again and again. And then 5 was just like, I had a 5th camera for like a real short time. I was gonna sell it. I was like, what the heck, I'll use it. And I got like a couple of moments that I hadn't gotten before. And that's also a reason I still shoot on 5, but like, that's something I'd want to reiterate and encourage you in is like, you don't need 5, you don't need 4. I think 3 is like the ideal. You don't need more, you don't need less. 3 is perfect. Anything more is extra. Anything less, you're just being risky. I probably shot 20 weddings before I added a 3rd camera. So like if you're just shooting on 2, that's fine. Just figure out what system and what setup works best.
So I've been setting my f-stop for these 2 cameras on like 4 to 5. And I consistently am looking at the footage and something's just a tiny bit off. I have to increase sharpness, or I have the bride's head and the groom's face is just a touch out of blur. So do you typically like open that f-stop all the way up for like the ceremony if you can?
No, typically I'm shooting at like a 5.6, so mine's stopped down pretty low, maybe an 11. And again, as that number goes up, more and more is going to be in focus. You're gonna have more forgiveness with what's in focus, especially even if you're shooting on a 7200.
So you prevent it simply by just coming in checking. That's like the process.
I constantly monitor. I just walk back and forth the entire time. Like I don't stop. Like even if unless I'm actively filming with this camera, and I'm moving around, half the time I'll be like in the back getting kind of just like a slow pan across, and I'll be like, all right, look at my settings, keep moving, look at my settings, and like I just constantly monitor. And then when I'm not filming with this, either I stop recording for a little bit or readjust this, put it in the middle of the aisle, and then I'll just go around, and probably every minute on the minute I'm just like my framing, he's in focus, go over, check, like I just move the entire time. It's like a little puzzle piece. It's like if there were like the 3 stretch of the aisle, so like the sides, the back, and then the middle, I'm basically just like check, look at my gimbal, check, and I just do like an M the entire ceremony, and I don't stop moving until it's like close to the end, and I'm like, I don't know when they're gonna be finished. I'll grab my gimbal and just wait. And I say I shoot with 5 cameras, but honestly it's usually 4 that are rolling. Like everything on tripod will stay and continuously roll, but that's when you can get creative with your gimbal. If you want it, like in a situation like this, if you want it to get really far away and get like a crazy wide shot, or if you wanted to do like a push up through the middle, who cares if you're in 2 of your cameras for 30 seconds, you got your cameras on the side that are getting stuff. I'm learning something that like blows my mind every wedding. Even if it's like super small, there might be stuff you all are already doing that like I've missed, I've looked over. So it has so much to do with like perspective and prioritizing what you want your couple to see and what you want them to experience and feel. The amount of cameras isn't everything. It's cool, it can be fun, creates conversations, and you can get some awesome moments with all the coverage, but yeah, it's not always about how much gear you have, for sure. So that's just a brief look at how I approach and shoot wedding ceremonies as a solo wedding videographer. Now that didn't get into depth on all the other different circumstances and scenarios that we can encounter. It also didn't touch on other things like lighting, audio, and a number of other things. But in the next couple of months, I will be building out a mini course specifically focused on shooting wedding ceremonies and taking it a step further, looking at it from the perspective of a solo shooter. So I hope you enjoyed this content, and I will see you next time.